I think inevitably any anime fan will eventually come across a show that they prejudge unfairly, and they may not realize it for years because they just decide, for whatever reason, that it's not a show they have any interest in, only to eventually, at some point in the future, decide to give it a shot and realize they were wrong about it. And the reasons why people make these hasty judgments without actually having watched the series can be numerous. It can be because of a bad description that doesn't accurately describe the show. It can be because of concerns regarding character designs and artwork, or it can simply be because it presents itself as being part of a genre or subgenre or demographic or what have you that you may not have had the best experience with in the past. A show that I had poor prejudgments on before I finally sat down and watched it is 2008's Skip Beat. One that I knew about for many years and did not watch specifically because at that point in time, I had been burned by a lot of shoujo anime that followed the same sort of basic structure and involved a certain type of comedy, character design, and just general story progression that I wasn't a huge fan of. I think about shows like Lovely Complex or Blue Spring Ride, these shoujo romance anime that were generally very well regarded and popular amongst shoujo fans, but that I ended up not really enjoying. After experiencing multiple shows from that demographic, shoujo romances that were very similar and kept repeating the same things, the same actions, the same decisions that I was not a huge fan of, it left me concerned that a lot of the shoujo romance anime that I may consume would make a lot of those mistakes. And mistake is probably not the right word because for plenty of other people, they're not mistakes. They're benefits. They're good decisions. It's just for me, for my sensibilities at the time, they were not what I wanted to see out of the anime I was consuming. And the result was, for many years, despite knowing about Skip Beat, despite seeing that it was generally very well regarded, despite hearing about how it was getting a Kickstarter dub after many years of not being available dubbed and not having any sort of home media release because of a contractual obligation that it had to have an English dub in order to have a home media release, despite all of those factors, seeing that it was popular, it was well regarded, it was still well regarded enough to have this new dub produced a decade after the show had concluded. And yet, I still held off on it because I was genuinely afraid that it was going to burn me in the same way that a lot of other shows that seemed similar to it had already done. But to my very pleasant surprise, I was wrong. I ended up genuinely really enjoying Skip Beat. And even though, yes, I think it is fair to call it a shoujo romance, it definitely does not follow all of the same decisions that other ones that I had seen that I did not like chose to do. Which, of course, and this is something that in hindsight should be pretty obvious, but, it took actually experiencing it for it to click in my head that, not every shoujo romance is going to follow the same pattern. There are going to be differences. And this is the sort of thing that going forward ultimately made me more open to trying out other shoujo romances. If I had not watched Skip Beat and enjoyed it, I very well may not have ever watched Kimi ni Todoke. That was another show that, for the same sort of reasons, even though there were additional ones with that one, to be fair, that I held off on watching because I was afraid I just would not like it. Because I ultimately was willing to watch Skip Beat, it kind of opened my mind to being able to recognize, hey, don't just give up on this type of show, this demographic, this genre, whatever you want to call it, just because you've had bad experiences with some of them, because you can still find plenty of shows that do things differently and are still very much so members of that genre, but don't necessarily do whatever it was that you didn't like initially. So what exactly did I enjoy about Skip Beat? Why did it open my mind to being more willing to try out more shoujo romances of this variety? Well, a lot of that just comes down to the strength of the main character, Kyoko. She is very, very endearing, and so much of the show is just watching her growth, as she starts off primarily being driven solely by revenge against Sho. because of his betrayal of her and his mistreatment of her. That is her primary drive, just wanting to utterly destroy and get back at this guy for what he did. And honestly, that is very compelling in of itself. If that had been all there was to it, it probably would have gotten old, especially as we do start to see her get back at him and show him up, for lack of a better way to put it. There is a lot more to her as she grows, as she becomes an actress and becomes a better actress and gets involved in more projects than what would initially seem to be there at the onset of the series. She is more than just someone who wants revenge. And part of what makes her so compelling is how much she is able to help other people around her, other actresses, other people in the industry, people who she meets who need encouragement, who need advice. She's able to provide that. Her drive, her passion, her kindness, it ends up building a lot of strong relationships between her and the supporting and side characters. And ultimately, I do think that her romance that isn't concluded by the end of the series, and that's something we'll talk about a little bit later, is still a compelling one. It may not get the resolution that it certainly deserved to get, but I do think it is largely handled well, and I think that both characters grow through their interactions with each other, which is what you want out of a good romance. You want each character to make each other a better person, to help each other through their flaws, through their struggles, through their problems, and ultimately improve each other's lives by being a part of it. In that respect, the romance and the character writing in general is very successful. I also want to talk about the dub and point out how fantastic it is. This is a Kickstarter dub, and what's very notable about it is they were actually able to dub the 2 openings and 2 endings into English, and that was great. And I don't know if it was the case with all of them, but at least with some of the songs, they actually had to basically make them from scratch. They weren't able to just get a clean instrumental. They had to make their own. And you can see this probably most notably in the first opening, just listening to the instrumentals from the Japanese version to the English, but they're all very well done. They are fantastic openings and endings. And it's always a treat to see actual official English versions of these Japanese songs, because it's something we very rarely get nowadays, because you have Japanese bands who want to market their songs and don't want there to be an English version they didn't make and blah, blah, blah. So it's always really, really cool when that happens. And of course, there are insert songs as well, because, hey, these are actors, there's singing involved, so you get those insert songs dubbed as well, which is always really nice. What's also notable about it is just seeing these actors from different areas sort of interact with each other. And granted, some of these actors have been involved more and more with multi-regional dubs since this one was made, but at the time, seeing Caitlin Glass and Chris Patton involved in a dub that largely utilized LA actors was something very, very remarkable. It may not be as special now because stuff like this happens more often, and those actors have been involved in other LA stuff, but to see it at this point was really, really cool. So overall, this dub definitely is very well done. If there is a primary issue with this series, it is the fact that so much is left unresolved by the end. This show has 25 episodes, and it does not have an ending. In fact, it kind of has less than an ending because, in addition to not resolving a lot of plot points, the last episode just kind of stops. Like, it really isn't an ending or even a resolution or even a stopping point. It's just like, it stops, and that's it. And I think anybody who wasn't paying attention to the number of episodes left would almost certainly think, oh, there's another episode. There's no way it just ends here, and it does. And that is very unsatisfying. And if there is a reason to not watch this series, if I'm going to give any sort of reason, it's going to be that, because this series doesn't even attempt to have a resolution or a stopping point. Like, if it had an okay seasonal conclusion and it just never gotten another season, like, yes, that would still be frustrating, but at least it would feel better than what we have here. And given that this show aired in 2008 and finished in 2009, I kind of doubt we're going to get a second season, despite the fact that there is plenty of material for them to adapt. It's not like they're in need of content. There's plenty they could draw from, and yet it just never happened. And I'm not entirely sure why. If it didn't sell well in Japan, obviously it did not have a proper release here in the West. You know, it had to get a Kickstarter a decade later, so that certainly may have contributed in some way, but it's very unlikely something like this will get a second season like it should. I have seen some people say, well, maybe it'll get a remake, but I kind of doubt that too, and I also don't know what the point of it would be. As far as I know, there aren't really any major differences between what got adapted and what's in the source material, so you'd be doing a remake just to do the same 25 episodes again. I'm sure people are going to say, oh, but it's been so long, but as you may know from other shows that have gotten remakes that I have not been a fan of, I don't usually buy that argument when we see shows like another shoujo romance in Kimi ni Todoke get new seasons after over a decade have no new content, and no one's had an issue with it. So I don't see a justification for a remake. And I also just don't think it's going to happen. I think that this just, unfortunately, is probably not popular enough to get a continuation of any sort. And it's a shame, because the ending is unsatisfying. There's a lot unresolved. The romance is not resolved. I still want to see Kyoko continue to develop as an actress. I want to see what she does with her new role on Dark Moon, but we don't get to. And it is going to leave an awkward taste in your mouth. That all being said, what we do have here, the 25 episodes that do exist, are very good. I really enjoy these characters and the bonds that they form with each other and the way that they help each other grow. I really, really adore Kyoko. I think she is one of the most underrated female anime characters out there, and one that definitely does not get the respect that she deserves, because the show she's in doesn't get the respect it deserves, including from me for many years. So I get it. I understand why that's the case. It's not a super popular show. It's one that hasn't had new content in a while. But if you've seen it, I think you'll agree this is a good show. And these characters are ones worth experiencing. Their journeys are ones worth experiencing. And it's just a real shame that we're probably never going to see the end of their journeys. Nevertheless, I'm always going to be grateful to this series for going against my expectations, for proving to myself that you can't judge everything by its cover. And there are always going to be shows that go against your preconceptions of them. And I think it's important for anybody who consumes media to have that in the back of their head, to not just write off certain series because you think it's going to be the same as stuff that you haven't liked in the past. You're going to be missing out on really great series if you allow those hasty judgments to decide definitively what you do and do not watch. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed. And until next time, take care, everyone. Look forward to the next video.